Hi, how's everyone doing? Please be patient with me. This is the first time I've ever tried to do a multi-language speech. So, my name is Dell Siefert, and I have been in the industry for 22 years. Most famous for Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, but I also did Clive Barker's Undying. I did a Family Guy game recently. I've worn a lot of hats in the industry. I've been a level designer, a system designer, creative director, and what you learn from this is you never get it right the first time. Like, it's really all about trying to find the voice of the game and trying to basically hone in on that as quick as possible, because every game is best when you have time to polish it, not wait to discover it. So this is where everyone's at. You have a great idea. For this case, we're talking about targeting AAA content with AAA titles and things like that. You have a spreadsheet figured out, you know your shipping window, you possibly even have a licensing opportunity, which is a blessing and a curse. And you're quickly moving to the green light, and you're like, okay, this is all gonna be awesome. Now let's just start and get the game going. The truth is, this is where a lot of people assume that because they already know the market they're making a game for, that making the game is gonna be easy. So what I wanna use is Star Wars Battlefront as an example of what we thought was a layup. So I call Star Wars Battlefront the Reese's peanut butter cups of gaming. Chocolate and peanut butter are great together. Battlefield plus Star Wars, obvious choice, right? They all have soldiers and vehicles. It's multiplayer, that's gonna be awesome. At the time, Battlefield 1942, capturing CPs was the new hotness. It was a really popular game idea. And then everyone loves Star Wars. So on paper, this seemed to be like a really, really obvious choice. In practice, the first Star Wars Battlefront was a brutal, brutal development cycle because we made these assumptions. So when I arrived on the project, we were like, hey, what we're for Battlefield 1942, all we're doing is putting replacing soldiers with stormtroopers, and we're replacing helicopters with X-wings, and everything is gonna be cool. And what really happened was it was utter chaos. The first things that became obvious was we were on console, we weren't a PC game, so the way people were playing the game was different than what we expected. Star Wars also, while it seemed like, oh, they have soldiers, we have soldiers, it really didn't play that way, and we were having too many variables going on. So the differences became really apparent very quickly. Even though their soldiers and vehicles seem to be the same, nothing about Star Wars is a military sim. It is a high fantasy adventure game or adventure in people's minds. There's a vast variety of sci-fi experiences. When you really think about most World War II games, they're very limited. People have guns, they fire bullets at different rates of fire, and maybe you throw a grenade every once in a while, but it's not that different. But when sci-fi comes along, you have tons of more experiences you want people to have, including lightsabers, including how all of the different sci-fi characters are going to behave. So also vehicles, we're just not a one-for-one relationship. X-wings are not helicopters. They don't belong on the ground in ground-based missions. And also, AT-ATs are just ridiculous. When it really comes to thinking about vehicle design, they are weird. So also, for shooters, even though we were saying we're doing a one-for-one relationship, taking a PC game and trying to translate it onto console was not a natural fit. This was before this was all figured out. So back when 1942 was going on, really there weren't that many good console multiplayer games. Halo was around, but not much else. So we had to work really hard to start going, what is the translation of not just 1942 to the console, but also 1942 through Star Wars onto the consoles. And then the truth of the matter is control points, even though it was the whole basis of what 1942 did, is not a good Star Wars fantasy. Luke never captured a control point. That's just not what Luke did. So when it really came down to it, people were not satisfied with that base loop. So we had to discover the game all over. And the point of this is that you need to find the heart of the game. And that heart, no matter if it seems like it's a similar game, you're going to find out very quickly that even the smallest change has tons of consequences and things like that. So when I first came onto the project, the maps that they were doing was just like, we put a bunch of vehicles on the map, we put a bunch of people on the map, everyone ran around. It was utter chaos. It didn't work, it didn't feel good. So the first thing I asked to do when I came on the project was the idea of, can I just do one map that is going to be focused on infantry combat? So I got to do Renvar, and Renvar was basically out of the comic books. It was never in the movies or things like that, but I was able to build a map that focused on how do infantry units play with each other? How are they balanced? Is it fun? What are your sight lines? What's the flow? How does the capture logic work in this world? And so for a moment, what I was able to do was reduce the variables so that we found what worked for all of the Star Wars infantry units, which were really diverse when you think about 4 armies, 5 units each, and that got even bigger when we got to Star Wars Battlefront 2. But what we did was we said, let's reduce the variables, let's iterate like mad. So, I mean, that's a map we shipped with back in the good old Xbox and PlayStation 2 days. It looks like a gray box map these days. But what was good about it was I was able to move and change and iterate really, really quickly, because that was what was important at the time, was to find the voice of what that was going to feel like. Another big win was Renvar was not a movie map. So I didn't have people with a ton of opinions about what it should be, whereas when you're building Hoth or when you're building Yavin or Geonosis, everyone's seen it in the movie, and so there's a ton of opinions about what's going on. So I bought myself some breathing room to simply figure out what was going to be the new heart of Battlefront moving forward. Once we knew that, then we could start to rebuild the logic of how infantry and vehicles were going to play off of each other. So the idea was infantry zones now were going to be all these building areas where infantry could hide. They had lots of cover. Normally the CPs were there, so infantry were vital to actually winning the game. You had to run into these zones. But we then created the vehicle zones, which is mostly the section in the middle where they were predatory zones. The vehicles could stalk that area. Infantry to capture CPs had to run across vehicle zones, so they went into threat spaces, and now vehicles became really important. And that interplay started to define the voice of the game moving forward. So the other one was capture zones. We were still trying to do 1942, but when it got to be on console, we made a bunch of choices that started to break why capture zones worked really well in the original PC game. So on console, we had a lot of AI combatants. We were spawning lots of just AI running around all over the place. So CPs were not empty zones that you could run into a capture. They were constantly being refilled by AI. So the game suddenly changed where it was all about speed. It wasn't about being prone and sneaking around places and doing the stuff that was popular with 1942. It was like, okay, suddenly we are becoming more arcadey. We have nimble soldiers that can do battle rolls. We have jetpack troopers that can fly places. So all of the flow and logic of why the maps worked in 1942 were broken by just these simple choices we were making because of science fiction and because of Star Wars. So one of the lessons out of that is that the singular objective of capturing these CPs was really not Star Wars. So all of those things were what we learned in the first year of development when we did Star Wars Battlefront 1. It was brutal because we were discovering that along the way. We assumed things were going to go well, so we threw out tons of maps. We were constantly remaking maps. We were constantly rebalancing our units because we didn't get to the heart of what our game was going to be versus what we thought it was with the 1942 stuff. So why I'm bringing this up is everyone assumes when you look at video gaming, everyone's like, oh, it's Hollywood movie pitches. You say, oh, it's Die Hard on a train. So what we do is we say, we're going to take Battlefield 1942 and put Star Wars with it. It's easy. We don't have to think about it very much. The truth of the matter is everything we did was brutal because we didn't think about it very much, because we didn't drill down and find the voice. At the end of Star Wars Battlefront, what we realized was what we did so well was you got to revisit all the classic battles from Star Wars. Everyone you saw in the movies, you got to go to and have that experience. And so we were giving this fantasy realization of letting these players be in all the movies they loved for so many years. And then the other thing that we realized was you get to play with all the toys in your toy box. So we all grew up, I'm old, we all grew up playing with all the Star Wars toys, buying all the Star Wars toys, going to your friend's house and playing with all the Star Wars toys. And so this idea of I get to pull these toys out of the toy box. It's why we were in third person, not first person. It's why we had such a vast army of things to do, is because that was important. And what we were left with realizing was the one thing we weren't offering was heroes to people, and they really, really, really wanted it. Once again, this is not Battlefield 1942 anymore. We were going into uncharted territory. So, with Battlefront 2, what was awesome is because we had those realizations near the end of Battlefront 1, we basically said, we are no longer Battlefield 1942. There's nothing we really want to take from that anymore. So we said, how do we help people play the movies? How do we realize the fantasy of Star Wars to its ultimate perfection? So one of the things we did that was really cool was we said, well, this time let's tell the story of the 501st. So the 501st are those crazy cosplayers who dress up as stormtroopers and they travel the world to all these conventions. They're nuts. And no one had ever told their story. And so we're like, guys, let's pay a tribute to these guys. Let's actually focus in. The 501st is supposed to be Darth Vader's special stormtrooper army that he had. So we basically drilled in and told that story. And it made it so much more personal for the people that are fans of the series that didn't really care or have any knowledge of what Battlefield 1942 was. They just wanted to have an amazing Star Wars experience. So with that, we also changed the game mode. So we left CP control, capture things behind, and we started to move towards objectives. The Battle of Hoth is about moving AT-ATs forward so you can attack and destroy the shield generator so you can invade the base. That's the story. So the CPs stopped making sense at that point, and it was more important for us to make our objectives, our mechanics, and things like that all feed into the fantasy of what Star Wars was. It's also the point where suddenly AT-ATs started to make sense. AT-ATs are ridiculous. You don't want to drive them. They make no logical sense as a battle vehicle. But as a moving spawn point, that as you get it closer and closer to the base, you're getting a payoff. Oh my God, now it became one of the most important things on the field. People were rushing to take them down. All the guys were spawning out of them. It became a really great focal point for our gameplay. So the other things was everyone wanted to be the hero. So we said we were putting everything out of the toy box, but we hadn't pulled them out of the toy box yet. We hadn't let you be Han Solo. We hadn't let you be Luke or Vader or all those people. And now you could. The crazy thing was this was the most controversial thing we did on Battlefront 2. They were pushing back saying no one wanted to be them. And we were like, look, yes, if you're doing Battlefield 1942, you're the soldiers. But if you're doing Star Wars, absolutely, who doesn't want to be Han Solo? But I literally had crazy conversations with the people at Lucas because they felt that we were breaking the rules of what 1942 was. But that didn't matter anymore because we had to find our own voice and make the right decisions for our audience and our players. So the other thing we didn't do was space. And in Battlefront 1, we were forced to put X-Wings and TIE Fighters on planetary missions, and it just didn't make sense. They're really fast. They don't hover. They don't do the things that you would need them to do. So we said, let's remove them from the planets. Let's go ahead and build space maps. Let's go up into the stars, and let's build missions, once again, that satisfy what people want to do. I want to destroy Star Destroyers. I want to attack them, and I want to blow them up. And that's what we focused on, was once again realizing this fantasy for our players. So the lesson here is what seems similar at first ends up being quite different. Star Wars Battlefront from 1 to 2 quickly transformed into its own game, and I wish if we had had the chance to go ahead and do 3, we were going to go even further on some of these concepts. The star-spanning adventure very quickly is not the World War II story, and a lot of that is what ends up confusing people when you start to make a game, is all the decisions that seem made because you're basing it on a game that already exists are all rediscovered again. And so a lot of what I try to emphasize when you're thinking about games is you need to know the heart of your IP. What are the things that are the fantasy that your players want to have? Because they don't have the knowledge as the developers have of all the different games you're taking for inspiration. They're going to pick up this. A lot of Star Wars people bought it because they were Star Wars fans and had no idea about everything else we were doing. And so it was more important for us to say, look, everything that satisfies the Star Wars fantasy is what we are going to focus on. So at that point, once we realized it, then we were also able to generate tons of content, offer players a lot more downloadable content after the project and things like that. So we did this reactively. The second part of my speech is trying to say, how can you take these lessons and turn them into something that you can do proactively? So the biggest thing I feel about game development is what we offer better than anyone else is fantasy fulfillment. We don't tell great stories. Movies do it better. TV series, Game of Thrones does it way better. What we do is let you be someone else for a minute. You get to be an all-star quarterback. You get to be a guitar hero playing, Rock Band and all those type of things. You get to be a god of war rampaging through ancient, Greece. These are fantasy realizations that we do. So what you need to do as developers is say every game you make, what is the fantasy we are going to satisfy for people? Who are we going to play to, and why are they going to love us? So in Battlefront, you could be a stormtrooper, you could be a rebel, you could be Darth Vader. We said yes to everything that a Star Wars fan would want to be. So moving forward, any game you do, you have to say, who are we? Know that fantasy, and then all your other decisions following that will become much cleaner and much more understandable because you're working towards a singular goal of realizing one fantasy as highly as possible. So the way I do this now, we used to call this a vertical slice. I don't think vertical slice is satisfactory anymore because normally that was getting things as rudimentary in as possible to prove something. I now call it an MVP, which is minimum viable product. But a minimum viable product to me is something that if I had to, I could put it out the day after we prove it and say, hey, here's an alpha for people to start playing. It is something where you are removing all risk. And so when I talk about risk, and I'm going to go into it in high detail later, but when I talk about risk, it's the idea of everything we don't know, we need to put up front and ask and answer as quickly as possible. And so you want to minimize the risk because after that, it's just about creating content and feeding the beast and expanding the team or doing whatever you need to do, but don't move forward until you do this. So a good friend of mine actually said it really well. He said, if you don't protect and prove the MVP, then all you're incurring is development debt later on. It's stuff you're going to need to pay back when you're on schedule, when you have bigger teams, you're spending more money making these games, you're going to have to come back to that. So you need to really, really protect and attack what an MVP is. I also emphasize this does not mean it's a low quality target. It's a streamlined, narrow target that basically proves every important feature that you are going to put out. So the other one with this is know your audience. So I call it hunting and gathering because all of your audiences these days, everyone out there, all these very smart developers are building communities that they are protecting and hoarding from you. They don't want their players to leave their game to go to your game, and they're not going to if all you're doing is offering them 10% better, right? Like in World of Warcraft days, there was a ton of other fantasy MMOs that came out that were like, our orcs are better, right? And like no one left. No one left World of Warcraft to go and see your better orcs because they already had their friends there, they already had their time there, they've already leveled up characters there. They're not leaving because you can do 10% better graphically with the orcs or because your orcs hit better or something else. Offer something that changes the game. Another way I see this is when Call of Duty took the World War II or the military shooter from Medal of Honor, EA for a long time tried to beat them by making Medal of Honor better, when really Battlefield was the thing that offered something new. Battlefield said, we have soldiers, but we also have vehicles, and we have a different gameplay mechanic that we get to offer you, and that's the way you beat your competition is by offering something more than the competition is offering, not trying to match them point for point, because they already have a lead on you. You're never going to catch up. So give them something to love. So what I mean by this is, honestly, think about why people are going to cosplay your game. I know that I'm speaking broadly because I'm mostly addressing console and PC, but I think this applies to everywhere, not because they have to cosplay your characters, but asking that question makes you start going through, why is it going to appeal to an audience? Who is going to want to be this? Are our characters appealing, or are they just freaking weird, right? So if you can do that, you are asking your players for time, so you want to make that valuable and make their investment valuable for it. All right, so now what's important here is you need to figure out how to get through your risk as quickly as possible so that you can actually get to the meat of making content. It's not about risk anymore. You guys need to identify risk and smash through it so that you are actually in a place where you can polish and iterate on the body of the content of your game. Okay, so when I talk about risk, as a general rule, nothing's hard, but as a general rule, I say try to only do 3 to 5 points worth of risk. So a new mechanic, something that's unproven, like you're going off and trying to say, we are going to base the strength of our game on this new mechanic that's going to blow everyone away. That's a risk. That's a point of risk per one you're trying to do. So just understand you don't want to go too far on that. An IP is always a risk because either if it's a license, you have to please your masters, and if it's a new IP, you have to get people to believe that your IP is interesting because you start with zero credibility when you first start making that IP. A new engine. Nowadays, this is a really, really big risk that I would tell you, if you're choosing to do a new engine, you can't do much more else because you're going to lose so much time waiting for features to come online. You're going to lose so much time just trying to figure stuff out before you're even in the middle of making content or finding what makes your game special and unique. If your team has never done the genre before, never done multiplayer before, or you're building a new team, you got to count that as risk. So the point is you start to see how this is all filling up really, really quickly. Every place you can minimize that, reduce it, control it, lets you get to the content. So time, schedule, and budget I call risk multipliers. Because the idea here is, if they made Overwatch with 50 people in 18 months, why do you think you can do it faster or better than they can? You need to start thinking about that. And if people are giving you low budgets or not giving you enough time, you just got to say, look, our risks are getting way crazier, or you're not going to get the quality project that you would like to get. The final one is team structure. This is very particular, but you need to have these things answered before you move forward. Do you have the specialists for these high-risk features? If you don't, you need to get them, or you need to consider cutting those features. The other one is, do you have a team that actually believes in what you're making? Like, this doesn't happen quite as often, but like, if you have a team that loves making racing games and you say, guys, we're making a shooter, they're never going to give you the quality of the game that you want to make because they don't believe in it. They don't want to go that direction. So in those cases, you need to think about not making that game, because you need to have a team that believes, because they're about to go to war for you to make a good product exist. But there is good risk. So good risk is how to stand out, not to catch up. So if you're just taking time to catch up to your competition and you spend most of your development time catching up, you're going to hit the market to a thud. It's not going to actually show up very well. But if you can basically say, let's get the risk out of the way so that the risks we are taking on are things that are going to make us shine and really appeal to the audience, then I think you put your time and your risk in the right places. So I look at something like Titanfall with the way they did parkour and the robots and say, that really shined. I wish they sold better, but if you want to go have a master class in level design, Titanfall 2 is unbelievable for looking at how to use mechanics in combination with level design for those type of things. Destiny's another one where they did polish and weapon balance that just feels amazingly good. The other good risk is distinct IP. Like Overwatch has changed the whole face of gaming because of what they've done. But the other side of it is distinct doesn't mean different for different sake. Okay, so the opposite side of the coin is Battleborn. I played Battleborn, I liked it, but everything about it was weird. And so when they look around and say, why didn't we get an audience? The answer is right in front of them, and they almost lied to themselves on this. So it's unfortunate, because I think what they were trying to do was interesting, but they turned away from their audience almost at every step. So the lesson in this is, sure, man, if you want to make an indie type of style game, or if you want to make quirky, weird type of stuff, have at it, but don't spend blockbuster money on it and don't expect blockbuster returns. So the point on this is, how do we manage risk quickly, and how do we basically get rid of all that so that we can move towards making the best game possible? So my first one is, by the time you actually have 8 or 9 people working, or even 3 or 4 people working on the project, blue sky is already close to being over. Even if you have blue sky concepts, you need to start turning them into goals and saying, how can we prove this quickly, or how do we fall back on a contingency to make these things better, or how do we move through it as quick as possible? At first, you will have way more than 10 items. And so my way of doing it is I try to set a priority and a risk so everything just sorts itself, and you just start marching through those as quick as possible. You're looking for contingencies. You're also looking for dependencies. So dependency is, this is important, but I'm waiting for someone else to give me something. That becomes really high risk when it's 2 of those things, because that's a gate. It's a blocker that you want to work through. So update this always. Always try to be thinking about what your top tech risk is, and quite often that will be either new engine mechanics you're trying to do, or you're really basing, like the game I'm working on right now, we're trying to do some stuff with grappling. We've never done it before, so we need to prove very early on that that's going to be a really good thing, and if not, we need to change the philosophy of the game we're making. Same thing with aesthetics. What's your IP risk? Are you making, if you want to take on Overwatch, then you need to know what that means. You need to make great characters with great diversity and things like that. So iterate early and fast, and then fall back on stuff so that you're figuring out this stuff quickly. You want to be in content creation and basically polish mode as early in the process as possible. Lots of times everyone waits and they're like, oh, at least we have 2 months to polish. It's like, no, you need to be polishing your main mechanics 2 months in, not 2 months at the end. So tech should not hold you back anymore. Don't build an engine unless you absolutely, absolutely, absolutely have to. I'm a huge advocate of using things like Unity or Unreal to basically allow you to jump forward. Because once again, you building a sound engine, you building a new graphics engine, all you're doing is catching up to people that have been doing it for 20 years in a lot of cases. So why do that if that's not the basis of your game? If you have some amazing technology, go for it. But otherwise, I would hope you wouldn't. So a lot of what I just talked about there is this idea of best practices. You're never going to be able to do all this because people have schedules, people have time. But what you're trying to do is get to the beating heart of the game as quickly as possible. That fantasy I was talking to you about, if you can nail that early, then your whole game benefits from it. Every decision you make, your ability to communicate with your team gets better because you're able to put a snapshot of who your audience is and who you're trying to make this game for, and everyone starts to understand it better. If you don't realize that until late, so be it. So with that, just be honest with yourself. Don't do the Battleborn thing where they said we're quirky. Like, look at your stuff really and say, who is our audience? And if you can't define it, you can't define it. And then a lot of it is just plain sweat work. Like, the best laid plans don't matter. You don't get it right the first time. So you need to put your head down and iterate and challenge yourself to make it as good as possible. Hi. So, thank you.
We have more time for questions, guys. Welcome to the microphone. We have questions. I know you won't say anything. No? Vote on DevGAMM app. Ask questions about indie again and again. Let's pretend it's crazy indie team. They don't think about good risk. They indie, they crazy, and didn't think about risks. It's bad risk. It's maybe 10 points. What should they do? They should close the projects when then you hear a speech and start again.
I would say that you absolutely pull the e-brake at that point and basically say, let's not waste more money or move forward until we know how to mitigate the risk, scale the project to the appropriate place. A lot of times the best thing to do is don't scale up the project until you have the risk answered. Like, my idea of an MVP would be if you can do it with 10 people, prove the MVP with as small a team as possible, and only when you feel you believe in the game, scale the game up. Now, that's not always possible because a lot of teams will be like, we just finished a project, we have 60 people waiting around, we need the next project we're going to work on. But my ideal would be if you can attack and acknowledge those risks and not be burning money during that time, that's the best way to do it. The reason I use that risk board is this idea of knowing to pull the e-brake. A lot of times people aren't even aware of all the things they've taken on. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to do it with a new engine. I need to hire more than half my team right now. And you're like, dude, like, you have dived into the deep end of the pool and you don't even know it yet because you assume that those are just like natural, production methodology. You need to account into that you've already taken most of the risk your team can absorb just by doing a new engine and hiring a new team, right? So that's why I'm saying if you can get rid of those risks by being smarter, start with a smaller team, use pre-existing technology, now you get to focus on risks that are worth it because they're going to make your game be unique, not simply catch up. We spend way too much time catching up.
Okay, thanks. And what if you have team, you have tech and understand what you do, but about setting? The market needs sci-fi. We have Star Wars movie, we have Star Trek in TV shows, but your team and you wants to be Gandalf. Your slides about who you want to be, Darth Vader, but now I want to be Gandalf. Well, my team needs to do a fantasy game or look to the market and do sci-fi.
Don't chase the market. Like, if you're not going to believe in it, you're not going to make a good product. Like, I had some slides in here where I tried to talk about this, where I believe you should go to the platform and to the genre that you guys think you have the best chance of showing something of quality. So if all you're doing is saying we're on mobile because there's a huge mobile share here and we're just going to try to dive into that crazy space because the numbers say, well, there's so many users, we will be successful. There's so many games that get lost in the craziness because they don't know how to stand out in whatever market they choose to. So if you guys can make a fantasy game that's going to show really well on PC, do it there. Don't do it on mobile because people are telling you, oh, there's X. Like, it's called Spreadsheet Fallacy, right? So Spreadsheet Fallacy to me is the idea that someone says, Overwatch has 35 million players. So if we just make an Overwatch game and we even get 10 to 20% of what they get, we're going to have 3 to 7 million players. We're all going to be rich. We're all getting Lamborghinis. It's going to be rad, dude. It's not true. No one's coming to you because no one's leaving Overwatch for your subpar product. And you need to assume you're not going to beat Overwatch, because once again, you're trying to catch up to Overwatch in 18 months, and that's 18 months of Overwatch getting ahead of you. So if you're not thinking about how to get past them or what new feature is going to make those guys leave that game to come to your game, you're not even getting 10% of those people. They're not leaving. They're not coming to you. And so I've seen tons of projects signed off in that mindset of like, well, Spreadsheet says we're going to be successful, so we're going to be successful. You need to know there's something about your game that's going to shine and show up for people and that they're going to value, because otherwise you've just lied to yourself and you've just blown a lot of someone else's money.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Or I can ask again and again. Okay, one more from me. Okay. I'm not in the studios. What do you think about, I don't know, do you hear about it with your Caliber now, free-to-play shooter about special forces like Spetsnaz for most of all CIS regions from now on? It's free-to-play and we work with wargaming. What do you think about it, about market, audience?
So free-to-play is a fascinating market, but it's all the same rules apply. Like, why is your free-to-play going to outshine someone else's, right? Like, early on, free-to-play, got ahead because there was very few of them, so everyone jumped in, everyone loved it. What's great about free-to-play is you get a lot more people trying it. So you're like, all right, we have 35 million players, but now how many are we monetizing, right? How many whales do we have? All these other things. So there's nothing wrong at all with anyone making any of these games. But what's going to be special? Why are people going to come and play your free-to-play game? Why are they leaving the ones that are already popular? Like, I keep on trying to draw Venn diagrams and say, why do people want to come to me? And if you just think we're another Counter-Strike clone, then why are people coming to you, right? Now, it could be that you have a market advantage. Like, over in Asia, they don't really let American games sell there very much. So when they go off and recreate their Spetsnaz game in Asia, it's because they own the market and they've created a unique opportunity by locking other people out. But when it comes to us, the sixth game in a genre that's the same as 5 other games, I don't know how you shine. I don't know how you show up for people. If someone's paying for it and they say they want it, then as a developer, go for it. You're making it for them. But if you're going to think about why your game is going to get market share, mind share, I would look very deeply at saying, what are we offering that's more interesting? I think one of the hard things with the free-to-play market is World of Tanks shines because everyone wants to have a garage filled with tanks. So I'm going to spend a lot of money filling my garage with tanks. When I do a shooter, once I have the shotgun I like to use, once I have the sniper rifle I like to use, I'm not giving you another cent. Right, so like I've bought the 2 pieces of equipment that I care about. The same thing with outfits. Like, I'm not going to buy 20 different camouflage coats. It just doesn't make any sense. But when it comes to vehicle games and things like that, people love to show off, right? They love to like come to my garage. It's all the crazy stuff that you see, where I think that's why that monetizes so well, is because there's so much people want to invest in. With a lot of shooters, I think that they start to not make the money back unless you find other ways of monetizing, because people don't express themselves that much in shooters. I'm in first-person mode. I don't see my character.
No. We have third-person mode and by your soldiers. Okay. No, weapon soldiers.
Right. Yeah.
Like toy soldiers, and they're shiny and beautiful like tanks, I think.
Yeah, they can be. Like, that's where Star Wars is better, though. Like, I can sell you all the toys. Do you want to be a rebel soldier? Do you want to be a stormtrooper on one of those speeder bikes? Like, there's so much visual diversity where that's where the toy box idea comes in. So I would try to challenge you to say, is there something broader that we can offer in that case? Because, look, military shooters are very popular. But I think it's hard once you're at the 10th one of them to say why you're going to stand out versus the other 9 that you're in competition with.
Okay, thank you. I think we have no more questions. Thank you. Thank you, Dell.
Thank you.